Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the spinner ball python. The spinner consists of two genes, the pinstripe and the spider. And both the pinstripe and the spider, they've been around for a really long time, and you can pick them up for relatively inexpensive, and they're pretty widespread. You can almost go to any reptile show and I can almost guarantee that you're going to see a spinner or a spinner combination. And when you actually take the pinstripe and you mix it with the spider, both of them are pretty gold snakes, and a lot of times you'll get a really super bright gold snake, which is a pretty awesome combination. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the potential of the spinner ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here at Morphmarket.com and I want to show you the two genes that make up the spinner. And the first one I'm going to show you is the pinstripe. This is what a pinstripe looks like. And I'd have to say the pinstripe's probably in my top 10 favorite morphs and ball pythons. It's actually a dominant gene. You breed it to something else, half the offspring come out as pinstripe. And usually the pinstripes can be pretty bright gold. Some of them almost look like a metallic gold. And a lot of times the pinstripes will have this really strong stripe right down the back of the snake, and they also usually have like little tiny like pinstripes coming down the side of the snake. It's a pretty awesome gene. And here is the other gene in the spinner, and that is the spider. This is what a spider looks like, and the spider pretty much gets its name from this spider web pattern that comes down the back of the snake. And a lot of times the spiders can be pretty bright gold. I'd say this is probably one of the brightest gold spiders that I've seen over here. And a lot of times the spiders can also have this white coming up the sides, almost like kind of like a pseudo calico, where you have more or less white. Sometimes the white will come halfway up the snake, and sometimes, like in this one, it's a pretty low white. You just see a little bit coming up, just the belly, just a little bit. So here's what happens if you take the spider and you work it into the pinstripe. This is what you get. Take a look at this. This is the spinner. Pretty amazing combination. It seems like when you mix both genes together, sometimes it can really enhance the gold color of the snake, and you get almost like a bright gold metallic looking snake. And essentially what it does is it takes the spider web pattern and the pinstripe, it reduces it even further until you get these little tiny like squiggly lines right down the back of the snake. Makes for a really amazing combination. And you definitely see the white coming up the belly a little bit from the spider. As a matter of fact, if you look at the price on these, this is unbelievable. You can get this for, look at this one, $100. That is pretty amazing. Probably one of the cheapest ball pythons. You probably pay for more for shipping on this one than you would actually pay for the snake. As a matter of fact, a lot of people, a lot of normals can cost, I'd say, well, it really depends on who's selling the normals and who's selling the spinners. Sometimes they can be pretty variable depending on kind of the supply and demand, but usually you can get them pretty, they're pretty inexpensive. You're picking up a spinner or a spinner combination. So I kind of wanted to show you some of the other genes that we can work into the spinner so you can see the ultimate potential of what the spinner can do. And the first one I want to show you is the pastel. This is probably the brightest pastel that I've ever seen over here on Morphmarket. Sometimes they can be super bright like this one. This is pretty amazing. And sometimes they can be, I'd say they're usually a little more browned out, and sometimes they can be really browned out where you almost can't tell that it's a pastel. It can be pretty variable. And a lot of times on the pastel you'll have like a pattern reduction. You can definitely tell on this one it's reduced almost into tiger stripes on some of these. As a matter of fact, I actually produced some pastels that I think might have enchi in them, and sometimes the pastels can kind of trick you to where you start looking into it thinking, I wonder if that has enchi, and sometimes it's just part of the pastel instead of actually being enchi. So here's what happens if you work pastel into the spinner. This is an interesting combination. Essentially what you get is what's called a spinner blast. So the spinner blast is the pastel, pinstripe, and the spider. And kind of the weird thing about this is you can see it really changed the appearance of the snake, and that's because when you mix pastel with the pinstripe, you get the lemon blast, which is really visually dominant. And then when you work spider into the lemon blast, the lemon blast kind of dominates the visual appearance, and you can definitely tell the spider is breaking through. You can definitely tell all three genes are in the mix. Pretty amazing. So take a look at this snake. This is actually the same thing with an additional pastel gene. So this is the super pastel spinner, also known as the killer spinner. They're kind of cool names on some of these. And it's interesting how you mix the pastel with the pinstripe, and it can really have a really dramatic visual effect on the overall appearance of the snake. So here is the Orange Ghost. The Orange Ghost, now let me tell you, I'm kind of warming up the Orange Ghost. I see a lot of these combos, and they are pretty impressive. And essentially what the Orange Ghost does, it's a specific line of ghost that brings in a lot of orange. Sometimes you can have ghosts that aren't really that orange, and then the ghost kind of fades out the color, almost gives it like a creamy appearance. So the Orange Ghost kind of brings in the orange and kind of smooths out the contrast and gives it kind of a creamy orange look. And here's what happens if you take Orange Ghost and you work it into a spinner. Take a look at this beauty. That is pretty amazing how it really complements the spinner. That's probably one of the best combinations I've seen with any Orange Ghost combination. And this one actually has Enchi in the mix, so you can definitely tell the Enchi is really reducing kind of the squiggly lines. I'd say usually the Enchi, it's already super reduced, where a lot of times you add Enchi, and sometimes you can't see much of an effect with the Enchi. As a matter of fact, on this one, it almost brings it into like little tiger stripes as far as these little squiggly lines. Makes for a really interesting combination. So here is the fire. The fire kind of has an unusual effect when you mix it with this combination. The fire is actually in the black-eyed leucistic complex. So if you take two fires and breed them together, you get a super fire, which is an all-white snake with black eyes. And I'd say most people, when they think about fire, they're thinking about the fire usually in combinations. It really lightens the background. It's kind of a lightening gene overall, I'd say. So here's what happens if you work fire into the spinner. Take a look at this. This is an interesting combination. This is actually the fire spinner blast. So this one actually has pastel in the mix too. So it's kind of interesting how the fire really reduces all the color. And a lot of times you actually see, I kind of looked at a lot of fire spinners over here, and a lot of times they bring in this really solid wide stripe right on the top of the snake. It's almost like it's working with the pinstripe to bring in that really big line right down the back. Kind of interesting. So here is lesser, and lesser kind of works the same way when you work it in with spider. It's kind of an interesting anomaly. A lot of times when you take lesser and work it into other combinations, a lot of times it'll bring in a lot of color and a lot of contrast, but when you take lesser and you work it in with spider, it works to give you almost like an axanthic, kind of an artificial axanthic look. So this is what happens if you take lesser and work it into the spinner. Take a look at this combination. This is kind of interesting. Almost looks like the fire spinner, except that it really lightens it even more. Almost gives it kind of an axanthic look. So speaking of axanthic, this is what an axanthic looks like. Axanthic is a recessive gene. You actually need 2 copies of the axanthic for a visual. And essentially what axanthic does is it strips all the color, and you're left with a black and silver and gray snake. Pretty amazing combinations. As a matter of fact, some breeders only specialize in axanthics. It's pretty popular, and it makes some really amazing combinations. So here's what happens if you take axanthic and you work it into a spinner. Take a look at this. This is pretty interesting. Essentially what you get is you get kind of a black and white spinner. It kind of removes all the gold color, and you're left with this kind of a silver metallic snake. Makes for a really interesting combination. So here is the bamboo. As a matter of fact, this is actually a picture of Bobby, the snake that I have around my neck at the beginning and end of every video. And the bamboo is really visually dominant. A lot of times you work things into bamboo, and the bamboo will dominate the visual appearance. The bamboo is also in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So if you mix the bamboo with like lesser or Mojave, you end up with an all-white snake with blue eyes, which is a really, it's one of the kind of the cool things about bamboos is you can make some really impressive combinations, and it's in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So here's what happens if you take bamboo and you work it into a spinner. Take a look at this. So this is kind of interesting. Usually the bamboo is so visually dominant that a lot of times other genes kind of get lost in the bamboo. And in this case, it makes for, as a matter of fact, you almost can't even see the bamboo in this combination. And kind of the cool thing about this is when you mix bamboo with the pinstripe, it seems like it turns it into kind of a metallic looking snake. Almost gives it like an iridescent sheen that I don't think you can really capture the iridescence in this picture. It makes for a really amazing combination. So here is the banana. Speaking of visual dominance, usually the banana is the most visually dominant. You mix banana into anything else and usually you get a banana looking snake, or at least you can see the banana in the combinations. It's really hard to actually hide the banana when you actually work it into other combinations. And this is actually a co-dominant. So you can breed two bananas together and get a super banana. And the super banana looks almost exactly like a banana, maybe just a little faded out. And here's what happens if you work banana into the spinner. Take a look at this. This is a really amazing combination. And let me tell you, when you start mixing banana in with a lot of other genes, you can make some of the most impressive combinations. And in this one, you can definitely see the white coming up the side from the spider. And you can definitely see the banana is kind of smoothed out from the pinstripe. Usually the pinstripe and the banana working together kind of smooth it out into like a solid color right on the back. That is a pretty amazing snake. As a matter of fact, if you're wondering on the prices on some of these, this is pretty amazing. This is actually $850. Well, this one is actually a female that is well started. Usually the females that have some weight on them usually sell for a little bit more because, you know, a lot of people are thinking about breeding them, and you know, this one is 665 grams, so you're like halfway to breeding size already on this girl. So here's the last one I wanted to show you. This works really well with a spinner, and that is the Orange Dream. And the Orange Dream can kind of trick you, I'd say, a lot of times. It's essentially what it does is it brings out a lot of orange in a lot of combos. Sometimes it can be really bright orange, and the Orange Dream just by itself almost looks like it has enchi in the mix. It really can reduce the pattern. And a lot of times with the Orange Dream, you'll actually have like little tracks along the belly that almost look like het pied markers. And a lot of people look at an Orange Dream and think, hey, there might be enchi in there, it might be het pied, and actually it's just part of the Orange Dream. So here's what happens if you work Orange Dream into the spinner. Take a look at this. This is a pretty amazing combination. As a matter of fact, I was looking at this, the white comes so far up the side, this almost looks like it could have some calico in the mix. Usually with calico, it brings the white usually above 50%. I'd say this is probably the highest white I've ever seen on a ball python with the spider gene without the addition of calico. And sometimes it can be pretty tricky because sometimes you'll produce, like, you know, you'll breed a spider and a calico together and you get a whole variety of different levels of white, and sometimes you're like, all right, is there really calico in there, or is it just the spider, a really high white spider? But you can definitely tell the Orange Dream really brings out a lot of the bright orange color on the back of the snake. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Jeff Black asks, what do you do with your soiled bedding? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, I have two different types of bedding that I use here in my reptile room. The first one I use for my snakes, I actually use a coconut husk chip. I actually buy Pro Coco by the pallet, buy a whole pallet at a time. It's really expensive buying a whole pallet, but let me tell you, and it lasts a long time, but I definitely go through it, and I end up with a lot of used bedding coming out of my collection, and a lot of that I actually use for gardening around my house. I have some raised bed gardens. I put it in with the soil, kind of as a soil conditioner, and kind of as like a top layer for my raised gardens. As a matter of fact, I use a lot of it just as kind of a ground cover around my gardens, which is pretty awesome. And for a while, I was actually selling a lot of that as a kind of used bedding over on Craigslist. It's amazing how many people will actually buy used bedding on Craigslist. I was actually advertising it as a landscaping material, used reptile bedding, and I can offer, you know, pretty much it's, you know, perfect for landscaping material, as long as you kind of pull the snake sheds out that don't freak people out. But it's pretty awesome. A lot of people will buy it, and a lot of times you'll actually recoup like half your cost for your reptile bedding selling it on Craigslist. It's pretty awesome. And then another type of bedding I have here in my snake room, and that is my bedding for my rats. I use a kiln-dried pine, and let me tell you, once you take that kiln-dried pine out from under your rats after a few days, that stuff stinks so bad, I just throw that stuff in the dumpster. I pretty much just get rid of it. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.